everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the December Shimmerz Paints Color Kitz collection. I am starting off with a piece of gessoed smooth white cardstock. I use 120-pound cardstock and then I coat it with some Liquitex white gesso. I'm using this absolutely gorgeous stencil that's included in the December kit. My idea was to create a resist. So the Stardust butter is sparkly but clear. So I was thinking that when I put sprays on top of the snowflakes that I created, that the paint would go all around the snowflakes, but the snowflakes would remain somewhat clear. That's not what ended up happening. One of the things with working with mixed media is you never know how different products are going to react until you try it out. But ultimately, I was happy with the way the background looked, so it all worked out in the end. I think the reason that I love this stencil so much is that, first of all, the snowflakes are so beautiful. That big snowflake is so detailed. I love the way it looks stenciled on this background. But I also love the way the snowflakes are arranged kind of randomly around the background, and the snowflakes are in different sizes. And I just think that makes such a nice background. I don't have to move the stencil around as far as stenciling one little area and then moving the stencil and stenciling another little area. I like the way everything is arranged. I have some background stencils, for example, bats for Halloween, and they're in a pattern, like a very geometric, regular pattern. I don't really like the way that looks most of the time. I like it to look a little bit more random. So yeah, I was just absolutely in love with this stencil, and I used it on some other projects when I was done with this project. And that's something I love about stencils. With a little bit of care, you could have them forever. So I waited for the background to dry, and then I began spraying a Vibez called I Missed You, and that's a color that's included in the December kit. And I knew that I wanted the background to primarily be this color, so I added a lot of it to the background, and then I used my paintbrush and I moved the paint around. Now, as you could see, kind of the opposite of what I expected to happen happened. The paint actually kind of stuck to the snowflakes and created a really cool effect where the snowflakes were actually a little bit darker than the background, and I thought that that looked really nice. So here I am using my heat tool to dry the first application of color, and then I go back and I add another layer of color to my background just to make the color a little bit more intense. And when I started this process, I was thinking that in addition to the Vibez, the I Missed You, which by the way is a brand new color, I was thinking that I might also add the Pool Me Shimmerz, which is also a bluish color. But I was actually so in love with this color that I decided that I wasn't going to add any of the other blue. I was just going to use this particular blue on the background. So you could see here that I'm now adding some splatters, and I always love to add splatters to the background. And I know if you have been following my channel, you probably know that I love adding splatters. I just think that it adds a really cool kind of random effect to the backgrounds. So I do want to mention that when you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, if you use my name in the comments, you'll receive a free gift, which is awesome. I always feel like it's great to get a free gift. And I have Shimmerz Paints for years, and one paint can really last a long time. So I think that adding one extra paint to your order would be kind of cool. And I also wanted to mention that the December kit is still available. Now, the kits come in 3 different ways. You can buy the entire complete kit. You can also buy just the paints, or you could buy just the papers and embellishments. So there's 3 different ways you could buy the December kit, and they're all still available if you look on the website. Now I'm adding some white splatters. I'm using some watered down gesso for this, and I use my fan brush, which if you can get a fan brush, if you like to add splatters, I think you'll find that it's a great way to add splatters to your background. So pretty much every year now, I make some kind of a Christmas layout where I have Christmas trees that I create in some way. And one of the ways that I have been making the trees is cutting out strips of paper, using a paper punch, and then layering them on top of each other. And I just find it never gets old for me, because every different collection that I use this technique with looks totally different, and I don't think that this layout was any different. So there was this piece of paper that had a whole bunch of different colors. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to cut out the strips and layer them on top of each other, because when you use a paper punch, you lose a little bit of paper. So I wasn't sure if there was going to be enough width to the strips of paper. If I cut them in half, which I would have to cut them in half in order to have enough strips, but it turns out that although the strips of paper were very thin, it worked out just fine. So I cut each of those strips of paper in half, and then I'm going to use this Shimmerz punch. It's just a very simple scallop. You could see to the left of my mat, I had a whole bunch of other punches kind of, in my mind that I might use, but I decided to go with this simple scallop. Then I took some rectangular pieces of paper and I drew some straight lines across them, and I did that with a T-square. And now I'm drawing the shape of the Christmas tree using my ruler, and I'm going to cut out these triangles. You could see that I made them in a number of different sizes so that I would have a number of different size trees. So very simple, just triangles with lines drawn across them. I use a pen because I find that the pencil will smear, and it doesn't matter because it's all going to get covered up anyway, but I just don't like the way that that looks. And these lines are not for me to necessarily put the strips of paper exactly on. I use them as guides just to make sure that my lines aren't starting to be crooked. So I started off with the pink paper and I'm layering it on top of each other. You can see I started at the bottom, and I'm trying to figure out how I could layer the paper so that it will be offset with each layer. So one layer, the bumps will be in one spot, and then I move the strip over slightly so that the next layer, the bumps will be in a different spot, will be slightly offset from the layer before. I hope that that makes sense. And you can see here that I'm using those lines, and they do help me to make sure that I'm not going crooked, because that's something that I've done many times. And so I've learned over the years that I do have to draw these lines. They're really helpful for me. If you have a better eye than I do, you probably don't need to make these lines. I'm going to repeat this same process with all of the 5 different colors of strips of paper that were on that sheet. And then I use my scissors to cut off the excess all around the outside. And that reveals, I think, a really cute little Christmas tree. And if you don't have a paper punch like this and you want to create trees like this, you don't have to make the bottoms of them scallops. You could just use strips of paper. You could also use your scissors to add a little bit of a fringe effect to the bottom of a strip of paper. So there's lots of different ways that you can create trees like this. Doesn't have to be exactly like this. And then I didn't want there to be a white edge. I like the idea of having just a little bit of shading along the edge of each of the trees. So I picked out a color of Distress Oxide that I felt went well with each of the trees, and I inked up the edges of all 5 of my trees. And again, I just happen to have these inks. You could use any inks that you have in your stash as long as the color is fairly close. So I mounted my photo on a piece of white cardstock, and then I mounted it again on a piece of the pattern paper from the collection. I love this yellow paper, kind of a gold color. And then I mounted it again on another piece of white cardstock because I knew that I wanted it to contrast with the background. And now I'm using some self-adhesive fun foam because I want to pop up my photo a little bit. I want my photo to lie on top of the Christmas trees just a little bit where they overlap rather than the Christmas trees overlapping the photo. So I'm going to place my photo right in the center of the page, and I'm making sure that it is indeed right in the center of the page with my ruler. And now I'm going to begin adding those trees to the layout. And I had an idea of where I wanted them beforehand. I know that I wanted to put 3 on one side and 2 on the other. So I put the largest tree on the right and then the smallest tree on the left, and then fill in with the medium trees. And then I use my ATG adhesive and I begin to attach them down. Now, I was thinking that it would be nice for some of the trees to have a little bit of dimension the way the photo does. Of course, I don't want to pop up the trees that are layered behind the photo, so I thought that I would pop up this pink tree. And I didn't put foam on the entire thing because the left side of the tree is resting on top of the green tree, so that gives it just a little bit of height. And then I attach down the blue tree, and I'm going to also pop up that light blue tree, that small one, that's to the left of my layout right now. And I just love the color combination here. I love the way the pink looks with the green and then the red with that really cool light blue color. I just think it's a very bright, shiny Christmas. It has some non-traditional colors, but I like the way they're mixed together with the more traditional Christmas colors. So I really like the way that this variety of trees looks together. So I wanted to put these lights underneath the photo. I end up switching that out, but it doesn't change that much. And then there's always such adorable little embellishments. I love the way they're very cute. So that snowman that I put on the left of the layout, I just love the way he's looking up. It kind of looks like he's looking up at the trees. And then there were some other smaller trees, so I thought it would be great to layer those around the bigger ones and create a little bit more variety in the sizes of the trees. And then I thought, well, usually gifts are found under Christmas trees. Maybe not ones that look like they're outside like these, but it's fine. I think that the gifts look really cool among the little trees. And then at the top, I'm going to create a little cluster with my title. It says Deck the Halls, which is perfect for this photo of my daughter Julia decorating the Christmas tree. And then there was this like adorable little, I guess that's a reindeer. Look, he's so cute. He has a little bow, or she has a little bow. I'm not really sure. And I put a little mug with some, looks like hot cocoa in it to the right, and then a candy cane to the left of the little reindeer. And I really find that to be just so sweet. I always love to include the dots. I just took the dot off the page, but there are 3 different dots in every kit. And this one has a pink Christmas light on it. So I thought that would be perfect for the bottom of the layout. So I add a little bit of adhesive and attach that down. And then I started attaching down all of these embellishments. I was really happy with the way that they looked and thought I was ready to commit and attach them down. So I attached down all of those elements you see to the right of the photo, and then I moved on to the title cluster. The Deck the Halls I thought would look a little bit better if it had a little bit of dimension to it. And that's one thing that I love about this fun foam. It's super inexpensive. It's very easily found in pretty much every craft store. Not that we have so many craft stores these days anymore, but I do think that it's pretty easy to find. And it's also not very thick at all. So if you want to add a little bit of dimension to your pages, but you don't want to go too crazy, I think it's a good choice. But if you don't have fun foam, or if you're not interested in purchasing fun foam, you can also just use a little bit of cardboard. Cardboard, either thick cardboard or thinner cardboard that's layered. If you want it a little bit thicker, that works just as well for popping things up. It's not as easy to cut, but it works really well. So this is what I decided to cut out for right underneath the photo. I thought that the scale of this is a little bit better. You can see that I fussy cut it out and then I put it to the left of the layout. I'm going to go back to that in a moment. If you've been watching my channel, you probably know that I love to add photo corners to my layouts. I love the way it brings another color close to the photo. It just is a little touch that I've just grown accustomed to seeing. So most of my layouts do have it. So I added 4 light blue photo corners. I inked the edges with a little bit of blue Distress Oxide. And then I did the same thing with this strip of lights. I used my daubers. I didn't even use any additional ink, and I just inked the edges with the same color dauber as the color of the light. And then I removed the other string of lights and I put this underneath. And I just love the way this strip of lights has all the colors on it that are in the rest of the layout, and I think that it brings everything together. I just love Christmas lights on my scrapbooking layouts. So now I'm going to decorate my trees. I always buy embellishments, and to be honest with you, I usually buy cheapy embellishments. These are little stars from a dollar store. They came in a pack with all different sizes, so I'm going to put different sizes on the trees depending on the size of the tree. And then for many years, I've been collecting self-adhesive pearls. I just buy every color whenever I see them for a good buy, whether it's at a scrapbooking show or if it was at Michael's or Joann's, which we can no longer enjoy. But anywhere that I see these pearls, if they're a good buy, regardless of the color, I buy them. And then that way I have a whole range of different colors to use on projects like this, because I do like to heavily embellish my layouts. And it's a great little finishing touch. I think that things like pearls and jewels, they just add a little something to layouts. So I like to have a lot of them on hand, but like I said, I go really cheap. I buy them when they are very inexpensive, and like I said, I don't worry too much about whether or not I like the color, because I feel like I never know what color I'm going to need. So I started off with the green tree, and I added a whole bunch of pearls in all different sizes. I tried to spread all of the sizes throughout the tree. I remember when I was little, my mom used to always tell me to put the larger and heavier ornaments at the bottom and the smaller ones at the top. And I think I always have that in mind when I'm adding embellishments to trees like this, but I think that I pretty much evenly spread the larger pearls throughout the trees. So I repeated the same thing on all of the trees. I picked out a color of pearl that I thought was close to the color of the paper that I used to make the tree. And the colors aren't exact, they don't match perfectly, but when you put them together with the tree, they kind of all blend. And then I took out my Glossy Accents and I added a little bit to each of the lights at the bottom, just to give them a little bit of extra shine. And then I added a few stars to the top, those same stars I used on the top of the Christmas tree. And then I put the layout aside thinking, okay, I think I'm done with this. But in my usual way, I go back later on and I add some more things. So the first thing I did was I found these jewels. These are kind of like rhinestones. They're self-adhesive. They are different sizes. And I added some medium size rhinestones to the photo corners. And then there were some really, really tiny rhinestones on this sheet. So I thought that if I added just a couple of those to each of the trees, that might add a nice little sparkly element. I feel like on Christmas trees, you really can't overdo it, right? There's no amount of bling that would be too much for a Christmas tree. And then I thought, well, I can't have bling everywhere but not have anything on the title cluster. So I took a number of those little tiny jewels and I spread them throughout, just kind of all around the title and the embellishments that are up there. And then after I added the jewels to the top of the layout, I realized that I had missed a few spots. That yellow tree at the bottom, that needed some jewels, so I added the jewels going in lines across the different sections. I didn't add any to that dark pink tree. I'm not sure why. And then I realized I forgot to add some of these little jewels to the large pink tree. I don't know how that happened, but I realized it after a while. Finally dawned on me that I skipped a tree. And so I was using my tweezers here to get those jewels attached down. It's a little hard for me to get these little jewels on my big fingers and get them to stick down. So tweezers really helped me out a lot. And then I was thinking this little bow would be a nice little touch. I tried two different colors. I thought the red looked the best. The blue was pretty too, but I just thought the red went better with this layout. And then I realized that I had a die in my stash that was a whole bunch of different sizes of stars. And they look kind of like Christmas stars, you know, like the North Star, or some of them do anyway. So I thought this would be a cool addition to the background. I don't think it was absolutely necessary. It was kind of like a last minute addition. I have a die, and I'm so sorry, I don't know where I got it from, but it cuts out a whole series of different size stars. And I found that I had a piece of iridescent white paper, so I just cut a little square out of that and used that to cut out the stars. Thought that would go well with all the shimmer that's on my layout because of all the beautiful shimmery paints and also all of the bling. And then once I had placed the stars where I wanted them, I used my Aleene's glue and I glued all of them down to the background. And then I continued gluing all those stars down to the background. And then I was thinking, remember I had thought that I was already done with this layout, that there was a little something missing from the title. I thought that on either side of the title, there was just a blank spot that needed a little bit of filling in. So I picked up one of the stars I had glued down and it made kind of a nasty tear on the background. And although I think the pine needles will probably mainly cover it up, just in case they didn't, I decided to put a star over that spot just to kind of feel like that little rip was gone. And then I used a die that I had in my stash, and I cut out some pine branches, and I used the inside of a frame that was printed on another piece of pattern paper. You could see it off to the left of my layout. So I used part of a pattern paper, and it was good because that gave me the idea to use that sheet in my next layout. But anyway, that way I knew that the color would match exactly because it's the same color that I used in the green tree. I attached those down. I add a little bit of glossy accents to the nose of the reindeer, and this layout is complete. I just want to say, for all who celebrate, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas, and I want to wish a happy new year to everybody. Thank you so much for being part of my channel, and I have a lot of exciting things that are happening in 2026, so I hope to see you back on my channel soon. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.